Hello, my dear friends. Welcome back. Come on in and let yourself be still for a moment. Settle into wherever you are tonight. Find the shape of your pillow. Let your shoulders drop a little lower than they were a moment ago. There is nothing for you to hold up right now. The room is small. The lamp is low. Your blanket is exactly where it should be. Take a slow breath in through your nose. Hold it for the smallest pause, and let it out gently through softly parted lips. That breath was the only thing the next few hours will ask of you. Take another, just like it, and one more, slower than before. You do not have to listen carefully tonight. You do not have to remember anything. The voice in your ear is here only to keep you company while the day finishes letting go of you. If your mind drifts, that is welcome. If your eyes close before the first hour is finished, that is welcome too. Tonight, dear listener, we are going to take a long, gentle journey around the world. We will visit 8 different countries, and in each one we will sit quietly with the small invisible neighbours that the people of that place have kept for centuries just beyond the firelight. Almost every culture, in almost every century, has imagined that the world is a little more crowded than it looks. There are people in the houses, of course. There are animals in the barn, but there are also, the old stories say, others, quieter ones, smaller ones, hidden ones, people who live in the burial mound, behind the stove, in the river, in the lava, in the forest, and in the stones beside the road. These were not the dainty winged creatures of children's books. People left them food, people bowed to them, people built their houses to make room for them, and in some corners of the world, people still do. Tonight we will move slowly from a green island in the North Atlantic, eastward into the pine forests of Russia, then onward to the rivers and rice fields of Japan, and across deserts and oceans to places further still. We will not rush. Each country will keep us for a while. There is no test at the end. There is no story you need to follow all the way through. Each chapter is its own quiet room, and you are welcome to fall asleep in any of them, so close your eyes if you would like to. Let the lamp fade in your imagination to a soft single flame, and let the world begin to become very small around you. The room is small. Picture a soft green ridge in the west of Ireland after rain. The grass is heavy. The air smells of wet earth and gorse. Somewhere beyond the field, a single crow calls once, and then is quiet again. The clouds are low, and the light is the color of weak tea. In the middle of this field there is a circle. It is a low ring of earth, perhaps the height of a child, crowned with hawthorn and bramble. From the road it looks like nothing. From the air it is a perfect ring, almost too neat to be natural. The farmer is steering his tractor along the field. He is ploughing the long, even rows that his father ploughed before him. As he reaches the circle, he does not slow down. Exactly. He simply curves. His tractor draws a wide, gentle arc around the ring of earth and continues on the other side. He has never thought about it. His father did the same. His grandfather did the same. The circle is left alone. The circle is what we would call a ring fort, or in Irish a rath, or a leos. It was built somewhere between the early centuries after Christ and the year 1000. It was a fortified farmhouse once, the home of a small family, with a wooden palisade on top of the earth bank. The wood is gone, the bank remains. There are roughly 40,000 of these surviving in Ireland. 40,000. In England, Scotland, and Wales, almost all such earthworks were ploughed flat long ago. In Ireland they were not. They were not preserved by a government. They were not preserved by a law. They were preserved by belief. Some of them have famous names. Rathcrogan in County Roscommon is a vast complex of ring forts and mounds that medieval Irish texts call the seat of Queen Med, the cattle-raiding queen of the Tyne. The Hill of Tara in Meath is a low green ridge studded with rings, mounds, and a long ceremonial avenue said for centuries to be the inauguration place of the High Kings. Inside Tara stands a smaller ring fort known as the Rath of the Synods, named for early medieval church councils said to have been held there in the time of St. Patrick. The names are old, the earth is older, and in every county of Ireland there are smaller nameless rings of the same kind, sitting in farmers' fields the way our circle sits in this one. Some sit on hillsides, some sit in the middle of bogs, some sit at the corner of a modern garden, fenced off with a low rope. The country is densely freckled with them, because in Ireland these circles are not just old farms, they are fairy forts. They are the houses of the Elves, the people of the Mound. Let that name sit with you for a moment. Elves. It is pronounced something like she. She is the older word. It means simply the mound. It is the same syllable that appears quietly in another word almost every English speaker already knows. Not word, that word is banshee. Not a banshee in Irish is bean cedar. Bean means woman, cedar means of the mound. A banshee is a woman of the fairy mound. When an English-speaking parent today calls a screaming child a little banshee, they are unknowingly invoking an Irish funeral spirit, an old sorrowing woman who is said to walk the night before a death in certain families, and whose voice carries from the burial hill. The word travelled all the way from a green field in Munster into ordinary kitchens in Boston and Sydney and Manchester, and the she sound, that soft hush in the middle, is just the old Irish word for the hill itself. So when you hear the word banshee, you are hearing the hill. The AOC, in the old belief, are not the small winged fairies of Victorian picture books. They are tall, they are beautiful, they are easily offended. They live inside the ring forts and the prehistoric burial mounds, and the mounds are doors. On certain nights, Samhain at the start of November, May Eve at the end of April, midsummer in late June, the doors open and the people of the mound come out. These 3 nights are not chosen at random. Samhain marks the close of the harvest and the beginning of the dark half of the year. May Eve, the night before Beltane, marks the cattle going up to the summer pastures and the world turning bright. Midsummer marks the longest day. Each is a hinge in the year. At every hinge the door opens a little, the fairy paths are walked, the hills are restless, and the human household keeps a quieter night than usual. The fairy paths themselves have a geography. They are said to run in straight lines between 2 ring forts, or between a fort and a holy well, or between a fort and a thorn tree. To build a house across one is to invite trouble. Old Irish farmers planning a new cottage sometimes drove 4 hazel rods into the ground at the chosen corners and left them overnight. If the rods were standing in the morning, the ground was clear. If even one rod had been knocked over, the corner sat on a path, and the cottage was moved a few yards to one side. The paths cross fields, they cross rivers, they expect to be left clear. To build on a ferry path is dangerous, to plough a ferry fort is worse. The old stories are full of farmers who tried it. Their cattle died, their barns burned, their children grew sick. The wife of the house lost her milk, the well went dry. The stories are still told today, and not always with a smile. In April of 2025, the Irish public broadcaster RTA ran a feature on the subject, interviewing farmers who quietly admit they would not, even now, take a digger to a ring fort. Some had stories of neighbours who had tried it and what was said to have followed. The stories had names attached. They had farm names. They had years. So the circles stand. They stand because of a working preservation system that is run in 2026 by superstition. If you have ever flown over the south of Ireland on a clear day and looked down at the patchwork of fields, those small green rings you have seen, those are 1,500-year-old houses kept intact not by archaeology, but by the careful arc of a tractor. In the late 19th century, a woman in Dublin began writing this law down. Her name was Lady Jane Francesca Wilde, born in 1826, who wrote under the pen name Speranza. She is more often remembered today as the mother of Oscar Wilde, but in her own lifetime she was a serious folklorist and nationalist poet. In 1887 she published Ancient Legends, Mystic Charms, and Superstitions of Ireland, a 2-volume gathering of fairy tales, charms, and beliefs collected from peasants on her estate in the West. Lady Wilde recorded their warnings carefully. Do not whistle at night. Do not let the child sleep with a window open during the haymaking. Do not give your name to a stranger met on a path after dusk. Do not, above all, take an iron spade to a fairy fort. Iron repels them, but it also offends them, and the offense comes back. She also recorded the small charms the people used against fairy mischief. An iron horseshoe nailed above the byre door, a sprig of rowan tied with red thread hung over the cradle, a pinch of salt placed under a sleeping child's pillow, a pair of scissors laid open on the window-sill on May Eve. None of these were grand magic. They were household actions done quickly, in passing, by women who had other work to do that morning. They were the size of folding a cloth or stirring a pot. They were the size of a kitchen. She was writing from a place where her servants would not pass certain stones at night, even by lamplight. The belief was not theatrical. It was practical. It shaped the route home. A generation later, the poet William Butler Yeats walked the same hills, listening for the same stories. Yeats wrote in his Celtic Twilight in 1893 that the country people of Sligo would not name the fairies directly. They called them the gentry, or the good people, or the others. To say "see" too loudly in the wrong field was to draw attention. The polite course was the indirect course. Yeats borrowed Lady Wilde's tone in his own way and carried these voices into rooms in London and New York where the listeners had never seen a ring fort in their lives. He wrote in one of his prose pieces of the 1890s that the fairy folk were a country in themselves, not at all the toy decoration of a child's bedroom, but a serious population, hidden in the very fields a person walked through every day. That one sentence shaped how a generation of English-speaking readers heard the word fairy. Picture again the field at dusk, after the tractor has passed. The light is softening, the hawthorn on top of the ring stirs in a small wind. Inside the circle the grass is taller and a little wilder than the rest of the field. Nobody walks in there, nobody mows it. The farmers' children, when they were small, were told not to play inside it, and so they did not. The ring is a quiet place that the entire farm makes room around. If you stand outside it long enough, you begin to see how the field has accommodated it for centuries. The drainage runs around it, the fence posts respect it, the stone walls bend just slightly to give it space. The land remembers what the people remember. There is a quiet etiquette in Ireland for these places that has never been written into law. You do not take a stone from a ring-fort home, even as a souvenir. You do not cut the hawthorn. You do not let the dog in. If you must walk through a ring-fort, you announce yourself politely in a low voice, and you apologize in advance. These manners are not unusual in the country. They are unusual only when you stop to notice them. The hill itself becomes the house. The mound becomes a door. The word for the mound becomes the word for the people who live in it. And from that word, somewhere along the long road from medieval Ireland to modern English, comes the voice that crosses ordinary kitchens when someone calls a tired, screaming toddler a little banshee. You can sit with that thought for a moment. The next time you hear that phrase in a film or in a friend's kitchen, the small invisible neighbour from this Irish field will be standing in the doorway of the language. The light is failing now over the field. The hawthorn turns to a darker shape. The crow does not call again. The farmer's tractor has gone home for the evening. The ring is left alone, as it has been left alone for 1,500 years. Far to the east, across cold rivers and pine forests, the same kind of small invisible neighbour waits, though here he does not live in a hill. He lives behind the stove, and tonight, somewhere in a wooden farmhouse, a bowl of milk is being set down for him on the floor. Imagine a low wooden farmhouse on the edge of a Russian village. It is winter. The roof is heavy with snow. A single line of grey smoke rises from the chimney into a grey sky. Inside, the air smells of bread, wood smoke, and warm wool. In the corner of the main room stands the pesh, the great whitewashed brick stove. It is enormous. It takes up almost a quarter of the floor. The lower part is the oven, where this morning's loaves were baked. The upper part is a flat sleeping ledge, broad enough for 2 children, where the grandmother often dozes through the afternoon. Around it the family lives. Around it the family eats, sews, mends boots, tells stories, prays. Diagonally opposite the pesh, in another corner of the room, hangs the Kresny Ugol. The phrase means the beautiful corner, sometimes translated as the red corner. Kresny in Old Russian carried both meanings at once. There, a small wooden shelf holds 2 or 3 icons, a Virgin in dark blue, a Christ Pantocrator with a faded gold halo, a patron saint of the family, often Saint Nicholas, the protector of travellers and of children. A small oil lamp burns there on holy days. The icons face the stove. The stove faces the icons. The room is held between the two, and behind the stove, in the warm narrow gap between the brickwork and the wall, lives someone else. His name is the domovoy, in Russian domovoy. The word means simply of the house. He is the household spirit of the Slavic world, a small, bearded old man, no taller than a child, often described as covered in soft grey fur, dressed sometimes in a peasant shirt, sometimes in nothing more than the shadow he stands in. He is the disembodied ancestor of the family, a great-grandfather perhaps, who never quite left. He is invisible most of the time. He prefers it that way. To see his face directly was thought to be a serious matter, sometimes an omen, sometimes simply rude. The family, on a quiet winter night, knows he is there in other ways. A floorboard creaks when no one is on it. A pot lid shifts on its hook. A horse in the barn nickers and is comforted. The cat sits up suddenly, looks at the corner behind the stove, and then settles again. The domovoy is, in the old belief, the keeper of the house. He looks after the cattle in the byre. He braids the manes of the horses he likes. He pinches the family in their sleep when there is danger he wants them to know about. If he is happy, the household prospers. The bread rises, the cow gives milk, the children sleep through the night. If he is offended, things go wrong in small, persistent ways. Buttons go missing, the dough collapses. The stove smokes the wrong direction. He is not the only invisible inhabitant of a Russian peasant farm. He has relatives. The dvorovoy lives in the yard, looking after the geese, the dog, the woodpile. The bannik lives in the bathhouse, the small wooden sauna where the family washed on Saturdays. And the bannik was best left alone after dark, when his temper was short. In some regions there is a domovika, a female counterpart to the domovoy, a grey grandmother behind the stove who keeps her own quiet watch. Each spirit had his own corner of the property. Each had his own polite distance. The household was not one mind. It was a small village of unseen guests, all of them family, all of them old. To keep the domovoy content, the family makes offerings. Every night, behind the stove, a small saucer is set down, bread, salt, and a little milk, sometimes a crust, sometimes a spoonful of porridge from the family's own bowl. It is a tender act. A grandmother does it without making any noise. She does not announce it. She does not look behind the stove afterwards. She just leaves it and goes to bed. It is, if you stop to compare it, a calmer and kinder version of the small saucer that English-speaking children leave out on Christmas Eve. The cookies for Santa, the carrot for the reindeer, those small offerings on the kitchen counter belong, distantly, to the same family of gestures. But the domovoy's saucer is older and quieter, and given every night of the year. In the middle of the 19th century, a Russian folklorist named Alexander Afanasyev set out to write all of this down. He was born in 1826 in a small town in the Voronezh region, and he died young in 1871. Between 1855 and 1867, he published the great Russian collection of folk tales, Narodnie Russkie Skazki, in 8 volumes, With more than 600 narratives, it is the Russian equivalent of the work the Brothers Grimm did in Germany. Afanasyev's pages are where Baba Yaga lives. They are where Vasilisa the Beautiful and Tsarevich Ivan and the Firebird live. The story of Vasilisa, sent into the forest by her stepmother to fetch fire from Baba Yaga's hut on chicken legs, is in his collection. So is the long cycle of Tsarevich Ivan and the Grey Wolf, riding across 3 kingdoms in search of a stolen bride. Almost any English language anthology of Russian fairy tales you will find on a library shelf today flows, in the end, from Afanasyev's 8 volumes, and tucked among the witches and the Tsareviches, the golden apples and the talking horses, is the small bearded man behind the stove. Afanasyev recorded him carefully, his moods, his offerings, his calendar. There was, according to that calendar, one particular night each year when the domovoy was difficult. On the 30th of March, by the old Russian calendar, he was said to shed his skin. From dawn until midnight, on that single date, he might go into a kind of household frenzy, slamming doors, frightening livestock, breaking small objects. The wise family stayed quiet on that day. They did not provoke him. By the next morning he had calmed, and the year resumed. The domovoy's calendar overlapped, quietly, with the larger Christian calendar of the village. He was given a particular saucer on the eve of Christmas. He was thought to be especially attentive on the night of Maslenitsa, the spring butter week before Lent, when pancakes were baked in the family pesh, and a single first pancake was left for him on its hot iron. He was acknowledged at Easter, when bread and salt were offered with bowed heads. The old belief and the new church did not argue. They simply lived in the same room, the icons in their corner, the domovoy in his. The deepest test of the relationship, though, was when the family moved house. This is where the domovoy's story stops being whimsical and becomes, in its quiet way, very moving. A spirit does not move on its own. He is bound to his hearth. To leave him behind is to leave a member of the family. So when a peasant household packed up to take a new home, a daughter married out, a barn rebuilt, a whole village relocated by an estate owner, they did not simply walk away. They invited him along. The ritual went something like this. On the morning of the move, the grandmother of the family went to the old stove. She raked aside the ashes. She drew out one hot ember, glowing red. She placed that ember inside an old felt slipper, or in a small iron shovel, or sometimes in a covered pot, or in some regions in a fold of clean linen. She bowed to the corner behind the stove. She spoke to it quietly. She asked the dedushka, the little grandfather, to come with them, to not be left alone, to bring his blessing into the new walls. She carried the ember through the snow to the new house. She entered first. She placed the ember in the new stove. She bowed again, and she said, "Welcome home, dedushka." Only then was the family allowed to move their belongings inside. In some northern villages, the ritual had an extra step. The household cat was carried in before any human and set down on the floor of the new house. The cat walked the rooms. The cat decided whether the corners were safe. Only after the cat had settled was the ember placed, and only after the ember was placed could the children cross the threshold. A spirit, an ember, a cat, a child. That was the order. A house left without its domovoy was said to have no luck. The walls might still stand, the roof might still hold, but something would be missing. And a new house entered without inviting the spirit across. That house, the old people warned, would never thrive. The bread would never quite rise the same way. The children would be restless. The cow would always be a little off. Out of this old logic comes another small gesture you might have seen at a modern Russian or Ukrainian housewarming. The first guests bring bread and salt to the threshold. The host welcomes them with the same. Salt is sometimes scattered along the doorway. The family blesses the new walls. It is a tradition that has survived centuries of revolution, displacement, emigration, and cultural change. English-speaking immigrants from Eastern Europe still bring bread and salt to a friend's new home, so you may never go hungry, so your home may always be sweet. Most of them no longer think of the domovoy, but the gesture is his, several centuries removed from the spirit it once welcomed. There is something gentle in all of this. The household ghost of the Slavic world is not a haunting. He is, in the old way of thinking, a relative. He is the family's own continuity. He is the generations of grandfathers who have already lived in the kitchen. To keep him fed is to keep the lineage warm. Picture the farmhouse again. The fire in the great stove has settled to embers. The grandmother has gone to bed. The children are asleep on the high ledge above the oven. The cow is quiet in the byre. The dog has curled in the doorway. The cat has chosen a place beside the iron shovel and is washing one paw. Very slowly, behind the stove, in the warm, narrow gap, the little saucer of bread and salt and milk is sitting on the floor. The room is still, the house is still. A kettle on the cooling iron makes one small final tick. A window pane settles ever so slightly in its frame. The snow outside is unbroken, soft, blue under a winter moon. Beyond the village, a wolf calls once from a far ridge and is not answered. The cat lifts its head, looks at the corner behind the stove, and lays its head back down on its paws. And somewhere just out of sight, very small, very old, very quiet, the dedushka accepts his supper. Long after this, in a country at the edge of another sea, the small invisible neighbour will not stay behind the stove. He will live in the river, and the rain on a sunlit afternoon will mean something else entirely. Picture a late summer afternoon in old Japan. Cicadas are singing in the cedars on the hillside. The rice paddies are full and green, terraced like wide shallow steps down to the river. The river itself is slow and dark and lined with smooth stones. The air is warm and heavy. Above the valley a strange thing happens. The sun is shining. The shadows of the cedars are sharp on the ground, and yet rain begins to fall. Light, fine, almost silver in the slanted light. A woman walking home from the market sees the rain and smiles. She does not run for cover. She turns her face up for a moment, lets a few drops fall on her cheek, and then walks on a little faster. She knows what is happening. She has known since she was a child. In Japanese, this kind of weather has a name. It is called Kitsune no Yomeiri, the fox's wedding. The literal meaning is the fox's bridal procession. When the sun shines and the rain falls at the same time, the old belief says somewhere in the hills a fox bride is being carried in a long lantern-lit procession to her wedding, and the foxes use the contradiction of sunlit rain as a cover. Humans must not look too closely. Humans must not follow. In the cedars on the far slope, you might catch sight, if you wish to, of small lights moving in single file, kitsunebi, foxfire, the pale lanterns of the wedding train. Whether they are really there or whether they are only imagined, the politeness of the old story is the same. Look quickly, then look away, wish the bride well in your heart, and go home. This is one of the gentler corners of a vast forest of belief in Japan called yokai, the world of folk spirits, demons, and creatures that live just beside the human one. Unlike Ireland with its single people of the Mound, or Russia with its single grandfather behind the stove, Japan does not have one fairy folk. It has thousands of yokai, with hundreds of names, some malevolent, some kind, most simply different. Tonight we will sit quietly with three of them, the fox, the river child, and the small spirit of the room. Many cultures, by the way, have a name for sun showers. In southern Italy, when the rain falls in sunshine, people say la volpe si sposa, the fox is getting married. In Korea, the saying goes that the tigers are wedding. In parts of South Africa, monkeys are said to be having a wedding. In Bulgaria, a bear is said to be marrying. In some English country dialects of the 19th century, the saying was simply that the devil was beating his wife. The Japanese version is the most internationally famous in the English-speaking world, partly because the great director Akira Kurosawa filmed the procession in eerie pastel beauty in his 1990 film Dreams. After Kurosawa, the image of foxes in formal kimono, gliding under paper lanterns through wet sunlight, became the default picture of the saying for half the world. Row, so the next time you find yourself walking outside in a sun shower, you can think of foxes. The fox in Japanese folklore, the kitsune, is a creature of long and intricate reputation. She is shapeshifter, she is messenger of the rice god Inari, whose bright red shrine gates can be found in tens of thousands of places across Japan. She is sometimes a wife, married to a kind farmer who never quite asks where she came from. She is sometimes a thief of rice and chickens. She is, depending on the village and the century, almost anything she chooses to be, but she is rarely cruel without reason. The most famous of all Inari shrines stands on a hillside in the southern part of Kyoto. It is called Fushimi Inari Taisha. A long path winds up the hill behind the main hall. The path is roofed in vermilion. 10,000 torii gates, donated over more than 1,000 years by merchants and farmers and ordinary worshippers, stand one behind another, almost touching, forming a tunnel of red wood and black lettering that climbs the slope for nearly 4 kilometers. To walk through them on a quiet afternoon is to walk inside a long, slow, breathing wooden corridor in which the daylight reaches you only in red. At the side of the path, Again and again sit small stone foxes with bibs around their necks. Each one holds something in its mouth: a key, a scroll, a jewel, a sheaf of rice. They are the messengers of the rice god, and there are thousands of them on this single hillside. Now leave the cedar slope where the wedding procession has just disappeared. Walk down to the river itself. Nature, the river is slow here, brown with the day's silt. There is a stillness in the water that, on a hot afternoon, looks inviting. Children are warned not to be deceived. The old people say there is something in this water that looks small and looks weak, and is neither. His name is the Kappa. He is a yokai of the rivers and the ponds. He is roughly the size of a child, perhaps the height of a 6-year-old. He is greenish, with webbed hands, scaled skin, and the shell of a turtle on his back. His face is a beak, his hair is a wet thatch, and on the top of his head, and this is the important detail, there is a small flat hollow, like a shallow dish, filled with water. In some districts the kappa is not called kappa at all. Along certain rivers in Kyushu the same creature is called Gitaro. In other regions he is the Suijin, the water deity, named more politely. The names shift, the shape stays. A wet child-sized figure with a dish on its head and the turtle's back lives in the water in every prefecture, under one name or another. The folklore atlas of Japan is full of these small differences in vocabulary that name the same neighbour. Ro, that dish is the source of his strength. As long as it stays full, the kappa is enormously powerful. He can pull a horse into the river. He can drown a grown man. He can wrestle and win against opponents twice his size. The rivers and the ponds of old Japan were full of stories of children who went to fetch water and did not come home, and the kappa was usually said to be the reason. But the kappa has, in classic Japanese fashion, an exquisite weakness. He is a creature of perfect, almost compulsive etiquette. If you meet a kappa on a riverbank and you bow to him politely, the kappa is compelled to bow back. He cannot help himself. Manners require it, and when he bows, the dish on his head tilts and the water spills out. The instant the dish is empty, the kappa is weak. He has to retreat to the river to refill himself. The threat is gone. You can sit with that paradox for a moment. In a country famous for its ceremony, even the river demon is undone by being too well-mannered. Politeness disarms a monster. It is, in its quiet way, a perfect Japan in miniature. The social rule is stronger than the muscle. Yukin Sikan has another weakness. He is fond, perhaps to the point of comedy, of cucumbers. They are his favorite food. Old farmers said that to keep a kappa from harming the family, you should write your child's name on a cucumber and float it down the river, an offering, a soft tax, paid to the green creature in the slow water. The kappa would accept the cucumber and, at least in theory, leave the named child off whatever list he kept. Whatever, this food preference has had a long and slightly absurd afterlife in modern English. Walk into any supermarket in London or New York or Sydney and look at the sushi shelf. There, almost certainly you will find a small black and green roll labeled kappa maki, cucumber maki. The roll is named by the language After a child-sized river demon whose favorite food is cucumber, every kappa on every shelf in the English-speaking world is paying tribute by name to a yokai. Most of the customers eating one have no idea. Now when you next see one, you will, and finally, leave the river to walk back up through the rice fields, past the small wooden farmhouses, into a quiet inn at the edge of the village. The shutters are closed for the evening. A single oil lamp is lit. The tatami mats smell faintly of straw. In one room of this inn, the people who know say, lives the Zashiki Warashi. The name means the parlor child. He is a yokai shaped like a child of perhaps 5 to 12 years old, with a red flushed face and hair cut in a soft bowl shape. He is rarely seen, and when he is, only briefly, a small figure in the corner of the eye, a footstep on tatami when no child is in the house, a small handprint where there should be none. He is, unusually for yokai, almost entirely benevolent. The old saying is that the household where a Zashiki Warashi lives will prosper. The rice yields well, the merchants pay on time, the children stay healthy. He brings luck simply by being there. He is fond of the smell of new tatami and of fresh rice cakes set quietly on a low tray in the corner of his room. In 1910, a young scholar named Yanagita Kunio published a small book called Tono Monogatari, Tales of Tono. It was drawn from the oral storytelling of a man named Sasaki Kizen, a native of the remote Tono region in Iwate Prefecture, in the cold north of the main Japanese island. Tono is a basin valley ringed by forested mountains, snowed in for long stretches of every winter, far from Tokyo and from the railway. Sasaki had grown up there, listening to his grandparents, walking the same lanes the old stories named. He met Yanagita through a literary circle in Tokyo. He told him the tales over many evenings. Yanagita wrote down what Sasaki told him as faithfully as he could. Tale number 17 contains a sentence that has shaped Japanese ideas about luck for over a century. Families with whom this spirit dwells become prosperous. And the same tale warns, when the Zashiki Warashi leaves a house, that house collapses. Yanagita is now considered the father of Japanese folkloristics. Tono Monogatari is, in Japan, what the Grimm brothers' tales are in Germany, a foundational national gathering, and one quiet sentence from 1910 still shapes how some old Japanese inns advertise their haunted rooms today, gently and proudly, as places where a parlor child has been seen. One inn in particular is famous for it, the Ryokufuso, in the small town of Ninohe in Iwate Prefecture north of Tono, is widely said to host a Zashiki Warashi in one of its upper rooms. Guests book the room months in advance. Some report a small footstep on the tatami at night. Some report a faint laugh from the corridor. Most report nothing at all, and yet leave content, because the visit was, in itself, a small folk pilgrimage. The inn is plain, the corridors are wooden, the hospitality is slow, the room costs no more than any other. It is simply known in the local way as the room with a child in it. Picture the inn one last time. The oil lamp dims. The wooden corridor is empty. The shutters tap once in a soft summer wind. Somewhere in a far room, on the tatami, there is a small footprint that was not there a moment ago, and then it is gone, smoothed away by the matting, almost as if it had never been pressed. The fox's wedding has reached its destination in the cedars. The kappa has gone back into the river. The parlor child has settled into his corner. Long before the cucumber and the river, far to the west on a desert plateau, another being also walked between worlds, though her language was older than any of these, and her name has crossed 3,000 years to reach us in the books we read tonight. The garden in Isfahan is cooling now, the way only a desert garden cools, slowly, from the stones first, then the water, then the air above the cypresses. The fountain at the center has been running all day, fed by a thin underground channel called a kanat that traces its course beneath the city, the way memory traces an old story. The water moves in the small, unhurried rhythm that a fountain makes when no one is watching it. A poet sits at the edge of the basin with a sheet of paper across his knee. An oil lamp has been lit beside him. The flame is small, the paper is pale, the page is almost empty. Around him, the orchard breathes out the heat of the afternoon. Pomegranates, quince, the almond trees have already finished. There is a single nightingale somewhere among the upper branches, beginning the small repeating phrase it has sung every dusk of its life. Tonight we will sit in this garden a while. We will follow a single word out of it, a word for a being that the people who built this garden once feared, then loved, then sent quietly across the world inside a book of poetry. The word is peri. In English we say peri, and tonight, very gently, we will follow her path through 3 religions and 3,000 years. Begin where she began. Long before this garden was planted, long before Islam reached the Iranian plateau, the people of this land worshipped fire and the cool order of a god called Ahura Mazda. Their priests were the Magi. Their sacred book was the Avesta, and in the Avesta, Aperika was not an angel, she was a demon. The Avestan Perikas were female beings created by Angra Mainyu, the dark twin of Ahura Mazda, to ruin the harvest, to block the rain, to drag comets across the sky, and pull the sun into eclipse. Same root, same syllables, opposite moral charge. The word that today in English can be used as a compliment for a small, graceful woman was once the name for the spirits a farmer feared most when his crop did not come in. Listen to that softly for a moment. The same 3 sounds, pa-rika, on a Zoroastrian priest's lips 3,000 years ago. Those sounds carried the weight of bad weather and lost children. On a Persian poet's lips 1,000 years later, the same sounds named a being almost too beautiful to look at. A religion did not erase her, it simply rebranded her. The middle stage of her journey is the one this garden remembers. After the Arab conquest of Iran in the 7th century, after the slow conversion of the country to Islam, the Perika did not die, she softened. The poets of medieval Persia, Ferdowsi, Nizami, Hafez, in time, needed creatures of light for their long romances, and they reached for the old Zoroastrian word and lifted it onto a higher branch. Now the peri had wings. Now the peri was beautiful. Now she was half fallen, longing to return to paradise, drifting between heaven and earth, waiting to be forgiven for an old sin no one quite remembered. The Encyclopedia Iranica, in its 2002 entry under the headword Perica, traces this whole arc, demon to angel, across 2.5 millennia, and you can read it tonight if you ever wish to. It is one of the longest moral journeys any single word has taken. The poets did not work alone in this transformation. Behind them sat patrons, copyists, and audiences who expected the old word in its new clothing. A Persian court of the 10th or 11th century, gathered in a tiled hall in Bukhara or Nishapur or Ghazni, did not want the demon of the Avesta. It wanted a being who could stand for the unreachable beloved in a love poem. The poets gave them one. The audiences accepted her. The scribes copied her into manuscripts. Generation by generation, the word climbed from the demonological page into the romantic page, and the older meaning quietly faded into the footnotes. The peri walks through the great Persian poets the way a moon walks through a long ghazal. In Hafez of Shiraz, in the 14th century, the beloved is sometimes named directly as a peri, periru, peri-faced, meaning that the beloved's face has the unbearable softness, the half otherworldly quality of a creature who does not entirely belong to the human courtyard. In Ferdowsi's Shahnameh, the great epic of kings finished around the year 1000, peris appear at the edges of battles, advising princes, lifting heroes from the field. In Nizami's romances, peris glide through orchards much like this one in Isfahan, just at the moment when the lover and the beloved have finally been left alone. By the 11th century, by the time the great Persian epics are being copied out in Khorasan and Shiraz, the peri is so common in poetry that no poem of love has to introduce her. She is simply there, hovering at the edge of the verse, the way a moth hovers at the edge of this lamp. The poet by the fountain knows none of this in the way a scholar would know it. He simply knows that when he writes the word pari into a love poem, the listener understands. A peri has feathers. A peri has a face that hurts to remember. A peri longs for paradise, the way the lover in the poem longs for the beloved. Ulva, a small thing about her name, is worth turning over slowly, the way one turns a polished stone. Persian uses a letter for the sound of P. Arabic does not. When Arabic-speaking scribes copied Persian books, the P sometimes shifted in spelling, became a B, became an F, drifted on the page. But in Persian itself, in Urdu, in Turkish, the word held its shape. Pari, 2 syllables, a small phonetic accident that almost lost her and did not. Now the garden grows quieter, and the page in front of the poet fills, line by line, far to the west, on the other side of an ocean he will never cross. Another poet is also writing by lamplight tonight. His name is Thomas Moore. The year is the early 1800s. He is Irish, born in Dublin, and he has been working for years on an enormous Orientalist romance set in a Mughal Indian court. He will call it Lalla Rookh. It will be published in 1817 in London, and it will become one of the most read poems of its generation, translated into French, German, Russian. Lalla Rookh is not one poem but four, framed by a prose narrative. A Mughal princess named Lalla Rookh travels from Delhi to Kashmir to be married. Along the way, a young court poet entertains her with four long verse tales. The first is the Veiled Prophet of Khorasan. The second is Paradise and the Peri. The third is the Fire Worshippers. The fourth is the Light of the Harem. Together they form a small movable theatre of romantic era Orientalism, half imagined, half researched, lit by Moore's careful reading of every Persian travel book he could find in London. Inside the second of these tales sits the moment that matters for our chapter. A half-fallen peri stands at the gate of heaven, asked to bring a single offering that will earn her readmission. She tries a drop of a hero's blood. It is not enough. She tries the last sigh of a dying lover. It is not enough. She tries at last the tear of a repentant man, and the gate opens. That is the moment the word peri enters English. The English language already had a word for fairy-like beings, fairy itself, on a completely different etymological track. Fairy descends from the Latin fata, meaning the fates, from fatum, things spoken, through the Old French fairy, which originally meant the land of the fae, and only later meant an individual fae. By the year 1300, fairy exists in Middle English as a place. By the late 1300s, it has become a being. Peri, by contrast, slips into the language fully formed in 1817, riding inside an Irish poet's imagination of an Indian court that imagined a Persian creature. It is now in every major English dictionary. It is on the same page as fairy in some, separated by a few inches of column. Two unrelated etymological pipelines, one Latin, one Persian, meet inside one English mouth whenever both words are spoken in the same evening. Moore's poem did not stay inside English. In 1843, the German composer Robert Schumann set Paradise and the Peri to music. He called the work Das Paradies und die Peri. It is a secular oratorio, neither sacred nor operatic, written for solo voices and chorus and full orchestra, and it premiered in Leipzig that December. Schumann thought for a while that it was the best thing he had written. The peri sings of her exile. The chorus sings of paradise. The audience, in a Leipzig concert hall in the heart of the German 19th century, listened to a Persian half-angel pleading for readmission to a heaven that the original Avestan priests would not have recognized. The word traveled inside the music. From Schumann it slipped into Liszt and Wagner and beyond. By the middle of the 19th century, the peri had also walked into the Western Garden. English landscape designers, building Orientalist follies for country houses, named small pavilions and arched bridges after her. Persian-style flower beds in Kew and elsewhere were occasionally labelled peri gardens in catalogues of the period. The being who had once blocked the rain in the Avesta was now in the west, decorating the corner of a Surrey lawn. The poet in Isfahan does not know any of this. He sets down his pen. The lamp gutters. The nightingale finishes one phrase and begins another, slightly lower in pitch. The fountain is still moving. The pomegranates are still hanging dark against the leaves. The peri, in his poem, has just been described as having a face the moonlight cannot quite touch. The garden tradition itself, in 19th century England, leaned on a half-imagined Persia. Wealthy estates near Tunbridge Wells and along the Thames built small Persian-styled summer rooms with painted ceilings and arched windows. Some of these rooms were known to family and gardeners alike as the peri room. Inside, the painted ceilings sometimes held a winged figure half fading into a cloud. The figure rarely held a nameplate. She did not need one. She had crossed 3 religions, 2 oceans, and several languages to arrive on a Surrey ceiling, and she rested there as if she had always meant to. A small final detail to take with you into the next chapter. The being herself, in folk practice across Iran and Central Asia, never really left. In Tajik and Turkish villages today, peris are sometimes invited rather than feared, called on by traditional healers, named in lullabies, kept inside the old vocabulary the way an heirloom is kept inside a chest. A religion did not erase her. A second religion only renamed her. A poet carried her into a language she had never spoken before, and there she has remained for 2 centuries, a small Persian word inside a much larger English one, half hidden, half forgotten, still able to mean a being almost too beautiful to look at. The fountain runs on. The nightingale repeats its phrase. The lamp goes out at last, almost without a sound. Far to the south, across the equator, the small invisible neighbour is no longer winged or beautiful. In Zulu and Xhosa houses tonight, parents will lift their children's beds onto bricks before the lamps go out. Picture a small white-walled bedroom in a township at the edge of a southern city. The hour is late. The door has been closed for some time. 2 children sleep under a single thin blanket, one on each side of a low room, and what you would notice first if you stepped quietly inside is that their beds are not on the floor. Each leg of each bed has been raised on a stack of red house bricks. 4 bricks at this corner, 4 at that. The mattresses ride almost a forearm above the painted concrete, and the children sleep up there as if on a small platform built for the purpose. Beside one bed, on the floor, sits a shallow bowl of water. The lamp has been turned down. The night outside is full of the soft sound of a southern summer. A far dog, a far television, the slow click of a kettle still cooling somewhere in the kitchen. The reason for the bricks has a name. In Zulu, tikoloshe. In Xhosa, tikoloshe. In Sotho, tikoloshe. In English language dictionaries today, including Collins, you will find the head word spelt tikoloshe or tikoloshe, with the gentle gloss and evil water spirit. This is one of the few folk creatures in this whole 8-country journey whose protection has hardened into architecture, into actual bricks, under actual beds, in actual houses, on this very night, across an entire region of Africa. The reason the bricks work is simple and worth saying slowly, because it is the kind of thing a child somewhere is hearing whispered tonight for the first time. The tikoloshe is short, knee height, sometimes waist height, no more. He cannot reach the top of a high mattress, so you raise the mattress. That is the whole defense. Bricks, stacked, one per leg, sometimes more. Some households use 4 bricks at each corner. Some use a single concrete block. The practice is so widespread that sleeping on bricks works as a casual phrase in township English, and South African English speakers in London and New York and Sydney still mention it, half laughing, when the conversation turns to sleep. A whole defensive architecture for a sleeping child, built around the height of a creature most people will never claim to have seen. The tikoloshe himself, as he is described in the storytelling tradition, is a small wet figure, hair-covered, an oversized head, bright, almost luminous eyes. He has been said in some versions to have a hole through his belly through which one can see the light on the other side of him. He prefers the riverbank. He smells faintly of mud. He has 2 ways of disappearing. 1, he drinks water and becomes invisible. 2, he swallows a small stone and the stone, somehow, takes him out of sight. In each telling the detail is a little different, and that is one of the marks of a still living folk tradition. Henry Callaway, a missionary in the colony of Natal in the 1800s, recorded an early variant. His book, The Religious System of the Amazulu, published in 1868, is one of the first English-language sources to take Zulu spirit belief seriously rather than dismissing it. It is also, in its own Victorian way, the moment a Xhosa and Zulu word began entering Anglosphere print. Callaway worked slowly. He sat with Zulu storytellers in the long verandas of his mission station near Pietermaritzburg. He wrote down what he was told in Zulu first, in careful columns, and only afterwards translated it into English, which is partly why his pages still feel close to the original voice. He did not always understand what he was hearing. He did not always agree with it, but he wrote it down. The next layer of the story is the layer that turns the tikoloshe from a random night creature into something more particular. He is most often in tradition summoned. He is a familiar, a creature kept and sent. The keeper is usually a sangoma or an inyanga turned malevolent, a healer who has crossed a line, a neighbour, an enemy, a former friend pays this practitioner a fee. The tikoloshe is dispatched. Sickness follows. Bad dreams follow. Sometimes accidents in the kitchen. Sometimes a wasting in the cattle. The remedy is symmetrical. To be rid of the tikoloshe one calls a different sangoma, a good one, and the work is unwound the way the work was first wound. The being is, in this telling, almost a hireable weapon. He does not arrive on his own. He is sent. This is one reason the bricks matter so much. If a tikoloshe could appear anywhere, any night, any house, the protection would feel hopeless. But because the tikoloshe is sent, because he must be paid for, because there is a chain of human reasons behind any visitation, the parents who raise the bed on bricks are doing something very small and very specific. They are raising one bed in one house against one possible enemy. The defense is intimate, modest, repeatable. 4 bricks, 4 bricks, 4 bricks, 4 bricks, done. There are smaller details to gather around the central image. In some households, a bowl of water is left on the floor. Water for the tikoloshe to drink, the way a saucer of milk is left for a domovoy in a Russian kitchen, the way a rice ball is left at a Japanese household altar for the small inhabitants of the house. The offering is not affection, it is etiquette. He may pass through, he may drink, he may go on. In other households, a small herb is hung above the door. In Fefo, the silvery sage burned in Guni ritual, whose smoke is said to be unwelcoming to ill-meaning visitors. The room itself becomes a small fortress of practice. Bricks under the bed, water on the floor. Imfefo above the door, 2 children sleeping above it all, one with an arm thrown over her brother's blanket, the other turned toward the wall. The tier S detail of this chapter, the share-worthy fact, is just how alive this is. This is not a museum tradition. This is now. South African public health campaigns in the 1990s and 2000s occasionally noted that raised bed practice was so common that it had to be discussed in the context of children sleeping safely. Tabloids in Johannesburg still run tikoloshe stories every few months. The word appears in court testimony in some witchcraft cases and in academic anthropology in others. Tikoloshe has been a head word in Collins' English Dictionary for years. A Xhosa word, naturalized into English, is now a thing an English speaker can look up tonight on a phone, in a kitchen in Edinburgh or Toronto, and read described in plain modern language. A folkloric loanword, alive in 2026, attached to a defensive architecture you can buy at any builder's yard for a few rand or a few pounds. The legal layer of all this is more recent than people often realize. In 1995, in the first year of Nelson Mandela's presidency, the new South African government convened a witchcraft commission. Its formal name was the Commission of Inquiry into Witchcraft, Violence and Ritual Murder in the Northern Province. It was chaired by Professor Victor Relushai, a respected ethnographer at the University of Venda. Its task was almost impossible. It had to find some legal language for a country in which witchcraft accusations were still leading in some districts to mob violence, while also respecting traditional belief and the work of legitimate healers. The Commission's final report, delivered in 1996, recommended a new framework, including formal recognition of healers and stronger protection for the accused. It mentioned the tikoloshe by name, a folk creature whose chief defense was a stack of bricks, had reached the policy papers of a post-apartheid government. Out of that work, indirectly came the slow professionalization of the Sangoma. By the early 2000s, the Traditional Health Practitioners Act formally recognized Sangomas and Inyangas as a category of healer. There is now a registration board. There are training norms. There is a clear distinction in the language of the law between a Sangoma working honestly and a Sangoma turned malevolent, the kind who in the old stories sends a tikoloshe out into the night. The folk creature has not been legislated away. He has, if anything, been legislated around. The differences between cities and villages have widened in this century. In Johannesburg, in the dense flats of Hillbrow or Yeovil, the bricks under a bed are now sometimes a half-joke, kept by an older relative and quietly tolerated by younger ones. In rural KwaZulu-Natal, in a homestead of a few round-walled rondevels under a tin roof, the bricks are simply how a bed sits. In Durban, on the warm Indian Ocean coast, the stories carry a stronger flavor of water, the tikoloshe coming up from the river mouth at dusk. In Cape Town and the wine country districts inland, where Xhosa, Sotho and Afrikaans households live close together, the figure picks up small new names from each neighbor. The folk creature changes accent as he travels, the way a person does. The geography of the belief is more varied than a single image suggests. In rural KwaZulu-Natal, in the green hills around Durban, the tikoloshe is most often spoken of in Zulu, and the bed on bricks practice is every day. In the Eastern Cape, around Mathaha and East London, the Xhosa form tikoloshe shapes the storytelling, and Henry Callaway's 19th century notes still echo. In the inner city flats of Johannesburg and Pretoria, the practice is quieter, sometimes joked about by younger residents, sometimes still followed in the smaller bedrooms of older relatives. English-language tabloids in Johannesburg run tikoloshe stories every few months. A security guard scared off a building site, a child waking from a nightmare, a sangoma blamed in a court case in some small dorp in the Free State. The folk being lives in the daily paper as well as in the bedroom. The bedroom around our two children is fully dark now. The kettle has stopped cooling. The far dog has gone quiet. The bowl of water on the floor reflects nothing at all, because there is no longer any light to reflect. The bricks under the legs of the beds are warm where they have been catching the heat of the room all evening, and cool where they touch the painted concrete. The children breathe in the easy, unconcerned rhythm of children who have always slept this way, who have never thought of the bricks as strange, who would, if asked tomorrow morning, give a small shrug and say, of course the bed is on bricks. All the beds in their family have always been on bricks. That is simply how a bed sits. A grandmother in another room turns down a paraffin lamp. Far away on the same continent, on the cold Atlantic side, a wave moves slowly toward shore. The night is doing what nights do. Somewhere a sangoma is asleep too, with the tools of her trade folded into a cloth at the foot of her own bed. Somewhere a name is being remembered, and an old word is being passed quietly down to a granddaughter who is still too young to repeat it. The lamp goes the rest of the way out. The bricks hold the bed holds the children. Far north and east of the equator again, the small invisible neighbor is taller and cooler, and her secret is hidden under her skirt. A coniferous slope in late autumn, the smell of resin and cold air mixed with a slow thread of wood smoke. Norway in the slow part of October, the hour before evening becomes night, the light gone blue between the trunks. Halfway up the slope, in a clearing barely larger than the room you are lying in, a charcoal pit is breathing. A low dome of earth and turf has been built over a careful stack of timber, and inside that dome the timber is smouldering, not burning, smouldering, turning, over the course of many days, into the dense black charcoal that the iron forges of the lowlands will need before winter. A man sits on a log beside the pit. He has been here alone for 9 days. He will be here for 9 more. This is the world the huldra walks into. To understand her, we must first understand the loneliness, she answered. Across rural Norway from the medieval period through the 19th century, charcoal burning was one of the loneliest occupations a man could take. The burner, the kulebranner, slept beside his pit for weeks at a time because the fire could not be left. If the dome cracked, the charcoal would burn to ash. If the heat dropped, the timber would only char and not coal. He napped in short shifts. He turned the coals at hours that no one else in his village ever saw. He talked to no one for days on end, and the huldra, in folk memory across Telemark and Hardanger and Trondelag, was the spirit who walked out of the trees into the firelight of these men, almost always at dusk, almost always alone, almost always beautiful. The economic logic behind the loneliness is worth a moment, because it is the iron that the whole story rests on. Norway in the 17th and 18th centuries supplied iron from a chain of small forges along the southern fjords, Eidsvollsverk, Berumverk, Nesjenverk, and every one of those forges ran on charcoal. Charcoal demands timber and a great deal of it. A single ironworks might consume the wood of an entire valley each season. So men were sent into the upper forests for weeks at a time to keep the pits breathing, alone except for an axe, a long iron rake for turning the coals, a flask of weak beer, and a sack of flatbread. The huldra did not invent her stage. The iron industry of the Norwegian forests built it for her, charcoal pit by charcoal pit, and she walked onto it. Her appearance is described with a kind of careful Nordic understatement. A young dairymaid, a pale dress, sometimes blue, sometimes simply white, yellow hair worn in a long braid, often crowned with a small wreath. From the front, she is indistinguishable from any farm girl who might have wandered up from the lowland farm 3 valleys over. From the front, the trick is always the back. Under her skirt, in the Norwegian variant, hangs the long tail of a cow. In the Swedish variant, the tail of a fox. In some tellings, the back of her body is hollow, a tree trunk seen from behind, bark and wood where the curve of a spine should be. The recognition rule is simple. Do not greet her until she turns. The Swedish cousin has her own name. She is the skogsrå, the ruler of the forest. The word rå carries the meaning of a wild keeper, a presiding spirit. She has the same trick of the back, the same fondness for charcoal burners, the same habit of stepping out of the trees just inside the firelight. She is not the same being as the huldra, but she lives in the same Scandinavian forest, on the same kind of evening, drawn to the same kind of lonely man. Folklorists treat them as siblings rather than copies. Each country named its own forest woman, each kept her tale hidden. The word she carries with her is older than the costume. Old Norse huldra meant hidden, covered, concealed. From this same Germanic family of roots come many things. The old German Frau Holle of the grim tale, who shakes feather beds out of the sky to make snow, the verb hilia to hide, and, by a slow series of steps, the modern English word hide itself. When you say tonight that something is hidden, you are using a word from the same root that names her. Every English speaker who closes a curtain, who tucks a letter into a drawer, who pulls a blanket up to the chin, is using a cousin of the huldra's name, a small etymological inheritance, hiding in plain sight in the dictionary, the way she hid in plain sight at the edge of a charcoal burner's clearing. Some folklorists have argued that the deepest layer of her tradition reaches back further than the medieval Christian period. The hollow-backed forest woman has parallels in early Iron Age memory across Scandinavia. In the same period, the first iron forges were being built and the first charcoal pits were being lit. A spirit of the wild forest, female, beautiful, dangerous, with a hidden animal sign, these elements existed in the Norse mythological imagination long before Asbjornsen and Mo. The huldra of the firelit clearing is a late costume on a very old shape. The man by the pit on our autumn slope has now noticed her. She has come, the way she always comes in the stories, just inside the edge of the firelight. She does not speak first. He does not speak first. He looks back at the pit. He turns the coals at the seam where they need turning. When he looks up again, she is closer, but not threateningly closer, just where a guest would naturally stand. She asks, in a soft lowland accent, whether the fire is going well. He says it is. She offers, without taking a step toward the pit, a quiet remark about the wind, about the moisture in the soil, about a way of banking the turf at the windward side that her grandmother once knew. He listens. The advice is good. By morning the coals will have burned exactly as well as if a master burner from the lowlands had stood beside him through the night. This is the kindly half of her tradition. Asbjornsen and Mo, Norway's grim equivalents, Peter Christian Asbjornsen and Jørgen Mo, collected dozens of huldra stories in installments between 1841 and 1852 in their Norske folkeeventyr, the foundational corpus of Norwegian folktale literature in the world's libraries. Most English-language Norwegian folktale anthologies of the last 150 years descend from this collection. In their stories, she is sometimes the helpful holder of charcoal burner camps. She turns the coals when the man dozes. She keeps the wolves off the edge of the clearing. She is, for one long autumn, an invisible second pair of hands. The folk songs of Telemark, the long valley west of Oslo where Asbjornsen and Mo spent many summers, kept her in their lines. There is a slow Telemark melody, sometimes called huldufólk, in which the holder is heard calling her cattle home from a high summer pasture. The tune has no fixed words. It is half a song, half a yodel, half a cattle call. It rises in long unhurried phrases, as if a woman were standing on a ridge in the late evening and listening for her own voice to come back. Versions of it were collected from village fiddlers in Telemark in the 19th century, and are still played today. When you hear it on a recording, even in a city, even on a phone, the forest enters the room with it. The other half of her tradition is darker, and it is the half on which the story most often turns. She might also love a charcoal burner. She might lure him deeper into the wood. She might walk him very slowly away from the pit and away from the village and away from the human world into a hidden home inside the mountain where time runs at a different rate. A man who entered with a huldra might come back the next morning as a man, or 7 years later as a stranger, or never at all. The forest around our smouldering pit is, in this older telling, a porous place. The trees are doors. The huldra is the one who knows where the doors are. Then there is the strangest detail of all, the detail that turns this chapter from a forest tale into something stranger and more human. In some Norwegian variants, a man could marry a huldra. He could lead her down out of the wood, take her into the church of the lowland village, and have her wed by a Christian priest. The Christian wedding had a precise effect. Her cow-tail dropped off, the hollow of her back filled in, her wildness left her, and so did, in many tellings, her beauty. She became, the storytellers say, plain, tired, ordinary, a capable enough wife who kept a clean house and bore strong children, but who had lost the strange shimmer she had carried under the trees. The price of acceptance was wildness. The price of being safely loved was being a little less fully alive. There are folklorists who hear in this story a quiet rural comment on what a wedding does and does not do to anyone who walks into one. The huldra also reached the concert hall in her own oblique way. In 1875, the playwright Henrik Ibsen finished Peer Gynt, a sprawling verse drama set partly in the Norwegian mountains. Edvard Grieg wrote the incidental music for its first stage production in 1876. Grieg's score did not name the huldra directly, but the long, faithful melody he gave to the character Solveig's song, carries the same patient watchfulness, the same standing on a ridge quality that the Telemark huldufólk had carried for centuries before. Peer Gynt itself walks among trolls and the king of the mountain, in the same forest where the huldra lives. The international audience that hummed Solveig's song in the late 19th and early 20th centuries was, indirectly, listening to a forest tradition that had been turning charcoal coals long before any concert hall existed. A few small details to settle into your memory, the way wood settles inside a slow fire. Her tell is always the back, a glimpse, not a full view. A cow-tail in Norway, a fox-tail in Sweden, a hollow tree trunk torso in the oldest tellings. The recognition is always slightly turned, slightly partial, slightly later than you would wish. Charcoal burners are her favorite men. She is most often seen in autumn. She does not speak before being spoken to. She does not enter the firelight uninvited. She is, in her own quiet way, perfectly polite. Our charcoal burner, on his slope at the edge of October, is now alone again. The huldra, if she was ever there, has stepped back between two trunks and become the pattern of bark and shadow she came out of. The pit is breathing well. The wind has dropped. The smoke from the dome rises straight, slow, blue against the deeper blue of the sky. He pulls his coat tighter. He bites a piece of dried bread. He thinks perhaps of the lowland farm 3 valleys over, of a real girl with a real braid he has known since they were children, and of the difference between a marriage that fills a back and a marriage that hollows one out. The pit settles. The forest takes back the clearing in the gentle way a forest always takes back a clearing, the moment the human inside it falls quiet. The Old Norse word huldra, hidden, moves on through the centuries inside English vocabulary, unnoticed, ordinary, settled into the verb to hide. The huldra herself stays where she always stays, just inside the firelight, just outside the firelight, just behind the skirt. Picture this: across a sea of grey water, on an island made of lava, the hidden people will not stay in folklore. In our own century, they will go to court. Picture this: the plane has just landed at Keflavik, and the first thing you notice, even before the cold reaches your face, is the color of the ground. Black. Not soil black, not the dark earth of a ploughed field, but black like a slow-cooled stone. This is lava, old lava, mossed over in places, broken into crumbled blocks in others, stretching for miles in every direction beneath a pale northern sky. The road curves gently across it. The bus from the airport runs east toward Reykjavik, and the windows fog softly at the edges. Outside, far off, a thin white plume rises from the ground where a geothermal pipe vents into the cold air. The smell drifts through the heating vent. It is faintly sulphurous, faintly mineral, the way a struck match smells once the flame has gone out. Iceland, before you have even reached your hotel, has begun to introduce itself through the nose and the eye, both at once. And here, in the first soft minute of your visit to this country, you may not yet realize something quiet about that road. It does not run in a straight line. Now and then, for no reason a passing driver could explain, it bends, a small detour, a polite swerve, as if the asphalt itself were stepping around something invisible. In Iceland, very often that is exactly what it is doing. Sometimes it is a single mossy boulder, a meter or two off the verge, that the road clearly chose to avoid. Sometimes it is a low knoll the bulldozers walked around. A passing tourist would not know. A local would simply nod. Galgaround is the most famous example, but it is not the only one. In Borgafjörður in the west, a stretch of road was rerouted in the 1970s after repeated machinery breakdowns at a particular boulder. In a small village in the north, a power line crew once found themselves unable to complete a foundation without consulting an elderly woman in the next valley who by local agreement could speak to the residents of the stone. Each of these stories is small. None of them appear in the international news. They are, the way a road sign or a fence post is, just part of the country. The huldufólk, the hidden people, live in the lava. That is how Icelanders have spoken about them for as long as anyone has been writing things down. They live inside certain stones, inside particular hills, inside the older folds of the landscape where the moss is thick and the wind has nowhere to go. They are taller than the elves of fairy tales, almost human-sized, almost the same as us, almost, and in that small almost the whole tradition lives. They keep their own farms beneath the rock. They wear grey or pale blue. They do not like to be disturbed. They are spoken of by Icelanders the way an old farmer in another country might speak of the family 2 valleys over. Not exactly known, not exactly strangers, simply there. The first person to gather all of this into a book was John Arneson. He was born in 1819 on the northern coast, the son of a country pastor. He read Grimm. He corresponded with a German scholar called Konrad Maurer, who urged him to do for Iceland what the brothers Grimm had done for Germany. And so for years he wrote letters in every direction, asking school teachers and farmers and old women in turf-roofed houses to send him the stories they had grown up hearing. Picture the slow logistics of it. A letter posted in October from Reykjavik might reach a turf-roofed farmstead in the north only after winter had fully closed the road. There, by the long evening light of a tallow candle, an elderly woman would dictate what she had heard from her own grandmother 40 years before. Her grandson would write it down with a steel-nibbed pen. Months later the letter would travel back, through snow and thaw, into Arneson's correspondence pile. Story after story, gathered the way one gathers driftwood after a storm. The result was Illenskar or Afentiri, Icelandic folk tales and legends. The first volume came out in Leipzig in 1862, the second in 1864. They are still in print today. And here is a small bridge that often surprises an English reader. A young Oxford philologist named John Ronald Reuel Tolkien read Arneson's introduction in translation, and from that text, among others, he drew the steady, dignified, almost human shape of his elves. Tolkien sat in college rooms in the 1920s, deep in the northern philological tradition, reading Old Norse and Icelandic alongside Old English. He preferred the elves of the sagas, who were tall and grave, to the small winged sprites of Victorian children's books. The elves of Rivendell, who live so quietly inside Middle-earth that you forget they are there, are partly a memory of an Icelandic farmer talking about the people in the next valley. The Icelandic story has another diaspora chapter that English speakers rarely learn. In the 1870s, after a series of harsh volcanic winters and failed harvests, several thousand Icelanders emigrated to Canada. They settled on the western shore of Lake Winnipeg in what is now southern Manitoba. They called the colony New Iceland. They built turf-roofed houses out of prairie sod. They printed an Icelandic language newspaper, and they brought the huldufólk with them in memory, naming certain stones along the lake shore as elf stones, leaving certain corners of certain fields unplowed for reasons their grandchildren could not always explain. The hidden people had crossed the Atlantic, quietly, inside the heads of the people who carried them. Now, the most surprising thing about huldufólk is not in any 19th century book, it is in this century. In 2007, the University of Iceland conducted a survey. They polled 1,000 Icelanders. They asked simply whether the existence of elves was at least possible. 62% said yes. 6 in 10. Not yes, definitely. Just yes, possibly, who can say? The wording matters. The respondents were not asked to swear an oath. They were asked whether they could rule out the hidden people entirely. 6 in 10 could not. It is a polite, scientific modern percentage, and it sits inside the country like a small held breath. A few years later, in 2013, that breath turned into a court case. On a peninsula just south of Reykjavik, called Alfdenes, lies a lava field with the name Galgarán. The name means gallows lava. It is rough, mossy, fissured ground, formed in an eruption 7,000 years ago, and it is widely believed to be one of the most populated huldufólk neighborhoods in the country. The Icelandic road administration wished to build a highway across it. A conservation group called Hraunvinir, the Friends of Lava, went to court. Their case mixed two strands. There was the ecological strand, the irreplaceable lava habitat, and there was the cultural strand. The road would, they argued, harm the homes of the hidden people. The case rose on appeal to the Supreme Court of Iceland. Hraunvinir did not stop at one road. The group has, over the years since, mapped other vulnerable lava fields across the country, asking the road administration and the planning authorities to consult the public before bulldozers move. Some of their requests are denied, some are accepted. The point is not that they always win. The point is that the question is now part of the planning process. A folk belief has been written, however quietly, into the paperwork of a modern European country. The court took it seriously. The judges did not laugh. They considered the environmental impact statement, the heritage of the lava field, the questions of cultural value brought by the conservation group. An initial injunction had paused the bulldozers. The full hearing came later. Bulldozers eventually moved in October 2013, but the campaign had already shifted what could and could not be done. In 2015, a particular stone in the path of the road, a 70-ton boulder believed to be an elf church, or Faifskirkja, was carefully lifted out of the lava field and relocated rather than destroyed. The operation took planning. The stone was cushioned. A flatbed truck was brought in. A crane lifted the boulder slowly out of its socket of moss. The drive across a few kilometers of road, at a careful walking pace, took most of an afternoon. There were photographs. There was a small ceremony, a church the size of a small house, moved by modern machinery, for the comfort of beings no machine can detect. A woman called Ragnhildur Jónsdóttir was, in those years, the public face of the campaign. She is sometimes called Iceland's elf lady. She speaks calmly and precisely on television, in English, the way you might speak about your neighbor's garden fence. She does not insist that anyone else believe what she believes. She simply reports what she has been told. When American film crews flew in, she walked them across the lava in sensible boots. She pointed at stones. She translated into clear English what the hidden people had asked her to pass on. Then she went home for tea. Reykjavik has a small institution that grew out of all this, and that English-speaking tourists occasionally visit. It is called the Icelandic Elf School. It was founded by a quiet, bearded historian named Magnus Skafadinsen. It is not a folklore museum. It is not a tourist trap exactly. It is a small classroom in a side street where Magnus gives a long afternoon lecture to anyone who arrives with the price of a coffee. He hands out tea and pancakes. He shows photocopies of 19th century elf maps. He tells the same stories Hon Arneson was collecting in the 1850s in plain English, in a soft voice, to a room full of curious foreign students and retired couples who are not sure what to expect. People leave with a certificate. They also leave, very often, a little quieter than they arrived. The most internationally famous Icelander gave her own answer years earlier on US television. The interviewer asked Björk whether Icelanders truly believed in elves. She said, "We do. It's sort of a relationship with nature, like with the rocks. The elves all live in the rocks." She said it without heat, without theatre, the way you might mention what the weather had been. Later, talking to Alex Ross of The New Yorker, she made a quieter joke about it. "The American record company people," she said, "ask every Icelandic band the same question, and whoever says yes gets signed. There is a country in there, a small country that has learnt its strangeness is also its currency, and that the strangeness is, in any case, true to it. And the strangeness is not only a story for cameras. Outside Reykjavik, a homeowner pours a new driveway and finds it bending, mid-pour, around a stone the family has always known. A municipality planning a roundabout in a small fishing town quietly consults a clairvoyant before the contractor arrives. A tour bus driver on the road from Selfoss points casually at a rock the highway curves around and says, "That one is theirs." None of these moments make the news. They are ordinary. They are how the country gets built. So now, lying here in the dark, you can picture the country fully. The black lava, the pale midnight sky, the small bend in the road, the 70-ton boulder being moved on a flatbed in 2015, a pollster ringing 1,000 homes in 2007, a young Tolkien reading Arneson in a college library in the 1920s, a pop star answering a question on a couch in New York, a woman in sensible boots translating for a film crew, an afternoon class in a small Reykjavik side street with tea and pancakes and a slow voice, a handful of Icelandic emigrants on the shore of Lake Winnipeg in the 1870s, naming a stone, a driveway curving around a rock. All of these are the same belief, gently translated through 150 years of paperwork and cameras and roadworks, and at the center of all of them is the same unhurried Icelandic shrug. Yes, possibly. Who can say? And so as the Icelandic dusk settles, picture this. Across a much wider sea, the hidden people followed a slower path of their own. They sailed west, with the people who carried them in memory, into the southern mountains of a continent that already had little people of its own, far across the cold Atlantic, far from any lava field. There is a porch in late autumn. It is somewhere in the southern Appalachians, perhaps in a holler in eastern Tennessee, perhaps in the western Carolinas, perhaps in the blue-ridged backcountry of Kentucky. The boards beneath the rocking chair are worn smooth. A creek runs somewhere out of sight, low and constant. A single firefly drifts in the cooling dusk, late for its season. The wood of the porch posts has weathered to a soft grey. A chipped enamel coffee mug sits on the rail, long gone cold, and if you tilt your head back and look up at the underside of the porch roof, you will see almost certainly that the ceiling is painted blue, a pale, soft blue, the color of a sky just before rain. That blue has a name. It is called haint blue, and the word haint itself is the soft-spoken survival of an older English. Haint is just haunt, drawled into one syllable, carried over from the dialects of 17th century Britain and reinforced, scholars think, by certain West African words brought through Gullah communities along the coast. Wiktionary traces the older pronunciation of haunt directly to haint, and dialectologists note a probable echo of a Gullah word, sometimes recorded as nyanti, used along the sea islands of South Carolina and Georgia. Two streams of language, one mountain word. A haint is a restless spirit, a returning ghost, a thing that comes back when it should not. The pale blue ceiling, the story goes, confuses the haint. It looks like sky or like water, and the haint cannot cross it. So the porch ceiling is painted that calm, faded blue, and has been for 200 years, and is still being painted that color today by people who would not necessarily call it a charm, but who would not paint it any other color either. The blue has its regional shades. In the Low Country, around Charleston, the ceiling is often a brighter robin's egg blue, sometimes mixed with milk and indigo into a particular Carolina recipe. Up in the mountains, around Asheville and into the western Carolinas, the blue softens, drifts toward gray, becomes the color of a sky just before rain. From Charleston to Asheville, from the low country porches to the mountain porches, that pale ceiling drifts above the front door like an upside-down lake. Inside this gentle landscape there are not one but two old traditions of small invisible neighbours. They are unrelated. They came from opposite directions, and somewhere in the 18th century they began to share a mountain range. The older of the two was already here, among the Cherokee who lived in the southern Appalachians long before any wagon crossed the sea. The small invisible neighbors were the Unwi-Sunsti. The name means simply the little people. They are described as knee-high, well-formed, beautifully dressed, with hair so long it almost touches the ground. They live in caves, in laurel thickets, beneath certain rocks, near waterfalls. They are not wholly kind and not wholly cruel. They might guide a lost child home, leading the child gently along a stream until the family's lantern came into view. They might also lead a careless hunter in slow circles for 2 days through laurel, so thick the daylight never found his face. Sometimes, late at night, hunters camped near a particular cave reported the sound of a small drum far inside the rock, beating a slow, steady rhythm with no human hand to keep it. There are Cherokee rules about meeting them. If you see one, you must not speak of it for 7 years, otherwise the gift they brought will turn to nothing. James Mooney, an ethnographer working for the Bureau of American Ethnology in Washington, gathered these stories in the 1880s and 1890s from speakers in the Qualla Boundary in North Carolina. He arrived in 1887 and stayed on and off for years, learning the language, sitting beside the storytellers, writing down each tale with patient ink. He published the result in 1900 in a long volume called Myths of the Cherokee, the 19th annual report of the Bureau. It is one of the great early American folklore collections. Mooney's pages give the Yunwitsunsdi several specific tales. In one numbered 78 in his collection, a hunter pursuing a deer is led to a cave where the little people feed him and send him home with a small gift, on the condition he tell no one for 7 years. In another, numbered 79, a fisherman who laughs too loudly at a flat stone hears small voices answering him from inside the rock for the rest of his life. The numbering matters because it shows how seriously Mooney treated the material. Each tale was given the same dignity as a Greek myth in a classical scholar's edition. The book is still on a shelf in every serious library, and the Yunwitsunsdi are still spoken of in Cherokee communities in the present tense. The second tradition arrived later by ship. From about 1718 onwards, a great wave of migration carried the Scots-Irish, Presbyterians from the province of Ulster in the north of Ireland, across the Atlantic into Pennsylvania first, and then southward along the spine of the Appalachians as the better lowland farms filled up. The first wave was small but specific. 5 ships left Ulster ports for Boston in the summer of 1718, carrying perhaps 700 passengers between them. Their names are still recorded in port books on both sides of the Atlantic: the William, the Robert, the Mary Ann, and 2 others whose names have faded slightly with handling. They sailed out of Belfast Lough and Larne and Coleraine. They sailed into a Boston harbor that was not quite ready for them. Larger waves followed across the next 60 years. By the end of the 18th century, the Scots-Irish had become the dominant settler population of the southern mountain backcountry, from western Pennsylvania down through the Shenandoah Valley into the Carolinas and Tennessee. The route they took has its own name in American history. They came down through the Cumberland Gap, the natural pass through the Appalachian Wall, where Kentucky, Tennessee, and Virginia meet. Daniel Boone marked the wilderness road through the gap in 1775, and within a generation tens of thousands of settlers, most of them Scots-Irish, had walked their oxen through that single notch in the mountains. They carried fiddles, they carried Bibles, they carried packed somewhere among the cooking pots the older country's beliefs about the small people in the stones. They brought with them what they had brought from Ulster, their music, their distinctive English, and their fairy faith, their fiddle tunes, the reels, the jigs, the old slow airs, became the seed of what would eventually be called bluegrass. Their long ballads, songs like Barbara Allen, with verses that ran on for 15 or 20 stanzas, were still being sung in Appalachian kitchens in the 20th century, almost word for word as they had been sung in Ulster 200 years before. And alongside the songs came the spirits. They believed in the scythe, they believed in the Gruagach, a long-haired guardian of the byre, and in Fear Deag, the red man, a small uncanny being who came to the door for hospitality and had to be welcomed politely, or he would turn the milk. In the New Mountains, these old beings softened, simplified, took on a quieter Appalachian name. Folklorists who have walked the back roads, Barry McCain among them, record a brownie-shaped figure called the Jackrow, a direct descendant of those Ulster spirits, still mentioned in the early 20th century by old people in remote hollows. This kind of mountain memory has been gathered in the 20th century by a series of patient folklorists. Beginning in 1972, a group of high school students in Reboone County, Georgia, started publishing a small magazine called Foxfire, in which they interviewed their grandparents about the old crafts and the old beliefs. The Foxfire books, eventually a long shelf of them, are full of tales of haints, of the wee folk in the laurel, of the small etiquette of leaving food on a stump near the spring house. Earlier, Vance Randolph, working in the Ozarks just to the west, had done similar work for the mountains of Missouri and Arkansas, recording ghost lore and fairy lore and folk medicine in plain prose between the 1930s and the 1960s. Each of these gatherings caught the tail end of a tradition that the highway and the radio were already pulling away. Within a generation, those two traditions began to look at each other across the same landscape. Both described a small, knee-high being who lived in stones. Both warned against trespass on certain rocks. Both required a similar courtesy. Leave a little food out, a little milk, a little bread. Thank the unseen. Do not laugh too loudly in the wrong places. A Cherokee grandmother, watching her grandchild play near a creek, might tell the child to leave a piece of cornbread on a flat stone before going home. A Scots-Irish grandmother, 2 miles away over a ridge, might tell her grandchild to leave a saucer of milk on a stump near the spring house. They were doing almost exactly the same thing. By the early 19th century, an Appalachian child might inherit, without ever quite separating them, a Cherokee story about the Unrelated from one neighbour and a Scots-Irish story about the wee folk from another. The two traditions did not exactly merge. They overlapped. They held the same shape of door open onto the woods, and in the language itself, the old Ulster mouth survived. In Appalachian English, holler is a small valley, reckon is to suppose, plumb is completely, afeard is afraid, yonder is over there, somewhere in the middle distance, often with a tilt of the chin. Fixing is about to, as in, I'm fixing to head down the road. Your is your, smoothed down by 2 centuries of mountain vowels. And directly, and here is a small puzzle for any outside ear, does not mean right away. It means soon, presently, after a while. If a neighbor in eastern Kentucky says, I'll be there directly, they may not arrive for an hour. Sometimes the word is shortened further still, drawled into something closer to directly. Mama have supper on directly. The doctor'll see you directly. The word travelled with a Belfast accent in 1718, settled into the mountain vowels, and quietly held on to its older meaning, while the rest of the English-speaking world drifted toward a quicker one. Anyone who has been gently confused by a mountain neighbor saying directly has, in a small way, heard the great-great-grandchildren of the Sidey still keeping time, the slow Ulster way. So the Appalachian little people in the end are 2 streams running together, a Unrelated, who were here when the first European wagon came over the gap, the fairies of Ulster, who arrived in the early 18th century with a Bible, a fiddle, and a handful of strange polite words. They both fitted somehow into the same laurel thickets, They both became the same warning whispered to the same children. Don't go near that rock. Don't laugh at that hollow. Leave a piece of cornbread out tonight. Pour a little milk on the stump by the spring house before you come in. And above the front door, the pale blue ceiling kept the haints away, while the woods at the edge of the yard kept the smaller, quieter, kinder neighbours. The porch itself, with its pale blue ceiling, holds the whole conversation in one small piece of architecture. The blue above the rocking chair is for the haints. The flat stone at the edge of the yard is for the unwi sunsdi. The stump near the spring house is for whichever wee folk the family's grandmother believed in most strongly. None of these gestures contradict each other. None of them exclude any other. The mountains are wide. The traditions are layered. The night is long. And so the night gathers itself. The hidden neighbours of 8 different countries draw quietly back into their mounds, their stoves, their rivers, their stones, their lava, their forests, their porches. Nothing more is asked of you. You have travelled a long way tonight, and you have not left this room. You began on a green Irish ridge, beside a circle of hawthorn and earth that no farmer would plough. You moved east into a Russian kitchen, where a small bearded grandfather lived behind the warm tiles of the stove, and was carried to the new house in the embers of the old. You crossed a continent into Japan, into a late summer afternoon of sun and rain at once, while a procession of paper lanterns moved through the cedars on a far bank. You sat for a moment in a stone garden in Isfahan, where a single nightingale sang above a fountain, and you watched a word, peri, make its slow journey through 3 religions and into an English book. You travelled south of the equator, into a small white-walled bedroom where 2 children slept on beds, gently raised on bricks, and a bowl of water waited on the floor. You climbed back into the colder north, into a Norwegian forest in late autumn, where smoke rose from a charcoal pit, and a pale figure half turned in the trees. You crossed a sea of grey water to an island made of lava, where a road bent quietly around a 70-ton stone, and a polite percentage answered a question about elves. And you finished where you are now, on a southern porch under a pale blue ceiling, the firefly drifting, the creek murmuring, the unwi sunzi and the children of the Sidi sharing one twilight. 8 countries, 8 kinds of hidden neighbour, the folk of the mound, the grandfather behind the stove, the fox at her own wedding, the peri in her garden, the small one who cannot reach a high bed, the cow-tailed wife in the trees, the hidden people in the rock, the little people in the hollow. They are not the same beings. They never were. They are something gentler than that. 8 separate human answers to the same small question that comes to every culture once the lamps go out. Who lives just beyond the firelight? Who is moving in the room we are not in? Who keeps the world company when we are asleep? Tonight, in their own places, they are quietly going home. The fairy folk are slipping back inside the green ridges of Munster. The domovoy is settling behind a stove in a village whose name you will never need to know. The kappa is sinking into a green river. The peri is folding her wings beside an Isfahan fountain. The tikoloshe is somewhere far beneath your raised bed and has nothing to do with you. The huldra is walking deeper into her woods. The hidden people are stepping back inside their lava. The little people are returning to their laurel thickets above the holler, each one small, each one quiet, each one no longer your concern. There is nothing more for you to carry, no name to remember, no story to finish. The 8 countries fold themselves back into the dark like pages of a book closing one by one. The candle by your bed has burned down to a low, even flame. The shape of the room around you begins to soften. The edges blur. The traveling is done. Let the green ridge fade. Let the Russian stove cool. Let the river go. Let the garden fall quiet. Let the small bedroom darken. Let the forest close. Let the lava settle. Let the porch ceiling blur to night. Close your eyes now. Slow your breath. There is nothing more to hold. The hidden neighbours are home. You may rest. Leap well. Sleep well.